Hello, this is Bob Bixby, Executive Director of the Concord Coalition, and I'm joined by Tori Gorman, Concord Coalition Policy Director. Good morning, Tori.
Hi, Bob. How are you today?
Pretty good, hanging in there. Some action on the Hill, kind of, at least in the House. Late last week, the House of Representatives passed a bill called the HEROES Act, which was intended to be another big rescue bill for the economy in response to the coronavirus. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. So first, let me say that the bill is so comprehensive, I think it would be impossible to summarize within the confines of this conversation. So how about if I just hit a couple of highlights?
Sure, you don't want to give us all 1,800 pages.
Yeah, you got all day?
Yeah.
So first, the cornerstone of the HEROES Act is nearly $900 billion in economic aid for state and local, tribal, and territorial governments. That's a major Democratic priority that many Republicans, not all, but many Republicans oppose. The bill also included another round of $1,200 stimulus checks for eligible adults, but would also expand the pool of people who could receive them. And then in the last sort of major big piece of the bill, it would extend the current unemployment insurance benefits through January of 2021. And it would also extend the $600 per week pandemic supplement that the unemployed have been receiving. So there's a lot in this bill, too much to cover right now, but those are sort of the three big pillars.
That sounds kind of pricey. Do you have any estimates on what that would cost?
Right. So an official estimate from the Congressional Budget Office is not yet available, but the ballpark estimate is that the bill would spend an estimated $3 trillion, more than the combined total of the four previous enacted measures that Congress has already passed into law. So it's big.
Of course, it passed the House. Next step would be going on to the Senate. Any chance that the Senate would take it up anytime soon?
So the HEROES Act, as it was passed by the House, is dead on arrival in the Senate. The bill was crafted without any input from Republicans, even though they control the Senate and the White House, and their support is necessary to get this bill across the finish line. And not only do Republicans disagree on the contents of what's in the House bill, but many also don't feel the same sense of urgency to move legislation. If you look back at recent news reports in the last week or so, both the chief economic advisor to the president, Larry Kudlow, as well as the Senate Republican Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, they've both been quoted on the record as saying that Congress needs to pause. We need to see how the states fare as they start to open up their economies for business, and that Congress itself needs to evaluate what it's already passed into law before it can consider moving forward with a fifth bill.
And Tori, putting on your hat as a former congressional staffer, were there any parts of this package that stood out that might be part of the next complete package?
Let me first state by saying I think it's kind of hard to predict what the next bill is going to contain, just because everyone has such very different priorities right now. It's sort of hard to understand where the Venn diagram, if you will, of policy wants intersects. As states reopen and employees return to work, the Republican-led Senate is prioritizing business liability protections, and they're also expressing some grave concerns over budget deficits. On the flip side, progressive Democrats in the House, however, they want a much more robust spending package than what has already passed, and yet their swing district colleagues in the House can't stomach what's already been passed. So there's some disagreement even amongst House Democrats. And then the White House itself is demanding a payroll tax cut that is both unpopular with Republicans and Democrats alike. So, with that chessboard, it's really hard to see where the the next bill lands. But that said, I think that lawmakers, at least in the middle of a global health pandemic that's very deadly, they don't really have the luxury of drawing red lines in the sand. So I think that, you know, they're going to have to come together. There's going to be a fifth bill. And I think you can look at some elements of the House bill that might survive in some fashion in the next measure. The first one is going to be additional aid for state and local governments. And what's going to lead Senate Republicans to the table there are the Republican governors. There are significant budget shortfalls in Republican-led states. That's going to force the Senate Republicans to capitulate on their position on state and local aid. For many governors, their state budgets have to be adopted before July 1st, when their state fiscal years begin, and to avoid deep budget cuts in essential frontline services, public safety, social services, public health officials. These are all the people that are keeping us safe during this pandemic. The federal government is going to have to step up and provide additional aid to state and local governments. The bipartisan National Governors Association has requested $500 billion in financial support from the federal government, as well as enhanced Medicaid funding and additional disaster recovery funds from FEMA. And I'm pretty sure that we're going to see their views represented in the next bill. Another opportunity is the expansion of the Employee Retention Tax Credit, or ERTC. The ERTC was a tax credit that was included in the CARES Act, which was the big bill that was passed, not this next one, but before that, which, if you recall, the CARES Act was a bipartisan bill. And it's sort of a bureaucratically free way, a bureaucracy-free way, if you will, to provide businesses with the cash liquidity that they need to retain their employees. It basically gives employers a 50% payroll tax credit up to a certain amount for the number of employees that they keep on their payroll. And the evidence to date is that it's working really well. If you look at some of the other measures that were in the CARES Act, the Paycheck Protection Program and the expanded unemployment insurance benefits, they've all been plagued with massive bureaucracy problems, technological failures, and the programs just have not rolled out the way that they were supposed to. And everybody's been pretty underwhelmed and disappointed with how those have operated. And the ERTC, the Employee Retention Tax Credit, is one way to overcome that. It's very simple. And what you saw in the HEROES Act, the HEROES Act actually increased the amount of the credit and expanded its eligibility. And so I see that as one element of the House passed bill that could survive in the next pandemic relief package. And it should have both bipartisan and bicameral support. So I see that as another opportunity for compromise. The last place, or the last element that I think that you're going to see for compromise in the next pandemic relief bill is going to be limited liability for businesses combined with enhanced workplace protections. I think as regional economies begin to reopen and employees return to the workplace, I think employers and lawmakers are right to be concerned about the threat of lawsuits from businesses when an employee contracts the coronavirus at work. I mean, it's the law of numbers, the probability is just, it's going to happen. And interestingly enough, House Speaker Pelosi has pointedly refused to draw a red line in the sand on this issue, suggesting that there is some room for compromise. Texas Republican Senator John Cornyn has been working on legislation that would shield businesses from liability as long as they comply with government guidelines. The House passed HEROES Act included language providing greater workplace protections for employees through OSHA. And I think between the two, you could see a starting point for negotiations on that particular policy measure. So those are sort of three things that I think that you'll absolutely see in the next pandemic relief bill.
A tougher nut to crack is probably going to be the unemployment compensation and how long to extend that for, and the $600 payments. But we can leave that one for another day to look at. When do you think that a real negotiation, or the sort of thing that you are outlining, where the trade-offs are being made, doesn't seem to be happening right now. There don't seem to be any active negotiations going on, either between the two, the House and Senate, or between anybody in the White House. That, as you
Right.
pointed out, has kind of their own wish list that isn't particularly welcome on either side of the Capitol. So when do you think real negotiations might get underway?
Right, right. So the Senate is going to spend this week confirming nominations and then recess for the Memorial Day holiday for a week. The House members are already back in their districts. So even though a fifth pandemic relief bill is a virtual certainty, I think at this point, the calendar already suggests that the timetable is going to slip until mid-June, where the two chambers and the White House are actually exchanging paper and negotiating. And it could probably even be end of June, July, before another bill is actually enacted into law.
So consensus is they're probably going to have to do something else. It's probably still going to be big, but we couldn't really speculate on how big. Probably not 3 trillion as the House did, but the things that you described would still be expensive, and that reflects the severity of the downturn and the severity of the healthcare crisis. So I think bottom line still is the best thing to do is end the healthcare crisis as fast as we can. That'll allow the economy to recover, and that'll allow the budget to recover.
Absolutely.
Well, Tori, thank you very much for that update from the Hill. And if you were interested in what we had to say this morning, please check us out on concordcoalition.org. We're on Facebook and Twitter as well. Happy to have your comments, and stay safe, everybody out there. We'll talk to you again soon.